Hello everybody, welcome back to NRW. I'm your host today, Rob Medina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm reviewing the movie Hipbeat. I first heard about this film in December last month, and the movie came out on digital and on demand back on December 23rd, and I saw the movie rather recently, so I'm a little late in the game, but better late than never. When I saw the trailer for the first time last month, I was immediately interested with the story. Something about the look of the film actually really appealed to me, and the story in itself was also very compelling too, which I'll get in a little bit into this review. And I knew right away when I saw the film for the first time that this is not going to be a film that's going to appeal to the mass audience. I don't think it's because of the subject matter, although there may be some people who have some conservative views about the character's journey, but that's a whole different topic on its own. But I think it's really more about the look of the film. The way the film is presented may not necessarily appeal to the mass audience, because this is definitely, for me, in my opinion, the epitome of an indie film. Like, this is the look and the feel and the rawness that I always felt like indie films have, that this movie is like just the example of. And it has this very organic feel to it, very in the moment feel to it that makes you feel like you're in the trenches with the character. That was what really appealed to me about the film when I saw the trailer for the first time, and of course the character's journey as well too. So with this review, I'm not going to get into spoilers here. I will get a little to the plot synopsis, my positives, my negatives, and then of course my rating. A young man by the name of Angus, searching for his identity, goes through a journey from anarchy to embracing love in Berlin in the LGBTQ+ community. And now let's get into my positives. My first positive is with the overall story in itself. One of the things that I really did appreciate about this film is that this gave me a much more different perspective on someone's journey going through a part of their life where they are coming to terms with who they are as a person. In the character of Angus, he hates being labeled he doesn't like being labeled as someone who's gay or pansexual or anything of that sort. He prefers just to be looked as a human who happens to be in love with someone who may be a man or a woman, transgender. Didn't matter to him. He just didn't like to be labeled that way. He just thought it was unnecessary, and it was just a nuisance, if you will. And in the movie, he's in a relationship with a girlfriend by the name of Angie, who he really does love and feel like is the love of his life. And she clearly does have feelings for him as well too, in the same level as he does, where they really are very close with one another and they have really nice, wonderful, intimate moments. But he's afraid to open up to her about what he really likes, as far as wanting to be in a very open relationship, a polyamorous relationship, if I'm not mistaken, if that's how he described it. And he's sleeping with men, women, and whoever else he is attracted to. And he was very concerned to share that with her because he thought that she may want to leave him. And another thing too is that he also wants to dress up as a woman as well. And he also comes across a drag queen who gave him a lot of inspiration to be able to pursue that, to actually go about and expressing himself in an honest manner, where before he wasn't able to do that because of the environment that he was growing up in, where it was forbidden. Now he's in a place where he's able to express himself for who he really is, and that's what he really wanted to accomplish. And this drag queen that he comes across gave him that inspiration to do that when he has conversations with her. So it's a very wonderful scene in the movie, in my opinion, that I thought worked very effectively, because it was a very real moment that I thought was so good in the movie. And then there's actually a part of the film, without really getting into spoilers here, where you actually do see where his girlfriend does discover these things about him. And it's one of the most compelling scenes in the movie, where it's for the most part, it's a single shot. The camera just sits in one spot and you watch everything unfold. Where he's upset, he's angry, and then he's like, give me a second, let me recollect myself. It's just, there's something about that seems so organic that I really did appreciate about that scene, that felt very real. Like, this is what I believe a person who is trying to open up to someone they really care about, and they're scared to do that, but you're also seeing that they're fighting all these emotions, where they're angry and that they don't want to be judged, and then they're shutting down. And they were having a discussion with someone else prior to that event there, where they're telling them, tell them if they love you, they will love you for who you are no matter what. And his partner was telling him, yeah, I do love you, don't worry about these things, I don't care, I'm just want to learn more about this because I didn't know. And then there are other things that starts to unfold along the way that kind of create some tension, which again, I won't reveal too much here with this review. But something about that particular story seemed very organic to me, that I've had conversations with people that I've worked with, friends of mine that identify as being gay, lesbians. I've came across a transgender as well too, that have shared their stories growing up about what it was like for them. And then, at the time, I was one of those kids who was very ignorant to that. I kind of looked at that as to insult them rather than accept them. And as the years have gone by, my perception has changed a great deal. And when you take the time to listen to someone's story and really understand where they're coming from, and really listen to them as a person, there's so much you can learn from that. And this movie, in my opinion, really does a really good job in helping you see that character's journey. Now, I'm not going to say that the character of Angus is a perfect person, because that is the furthest from this here, because that guy is not perfect at all. There are certain things he does do along the way that you do question. Why don't you just open up and tell this person that you love what you're actually doing? But you also understand why he's very hesitant about that, because again, the lifestyle that he wants to pursue is not considered to be normal in many people's eyes. But to him, he doesn't care. He just wants to be happy, and this makes him happy. So there's a lot about that story that I really, really did gravitate to, that helped me understand for someone who's going through that. And this was like a window for me to see that story. And like I said before, there's something about the way the story was handled here seemed very organic, seemed very real, like you're like really in the trenches with this character that's going through this story here. The other thing about the film that I want to point out is with the directing of this movie. Now, I do know that the way that the film is directed may not appeal to everybody. This is not a cinematic looking movie like you would see in theaters or nowadays in streaming platforms. This is a very guerrilla style type of filmmaking. There's a lot of weird angles, a lot of weird close-up shots that may not be considered appealing to mass audience, if you will. Something about the way the film is directed, for me personally, worked effectively for that story, because again, it makes you feel like you're in that moment, like you're really staring at a person's most vulnerable moment, and you're right there in their face to see that happen as it unfolds. I really did appreciate about that story. But again, I also do know that kind of approach with filmmaking is not going to be for everybody. But because the story was, in my opinion, was well directed, and the story is very compelling, I was still very much invested with the story. I'll go in a little bit to that with my negatives. There actually was a slight problem that I did have with that style of directing that really kind of bothered me along the way, which again, I'll get into with my negatives here. But my overall appreciation with the approach of the director here, I thought worked very effective for the story. Now, as far as the script is concerned, I really don't know how much of the dialogue in the movie is actually improvised here, because I would imagine that they're sticking close to the script there with the structure as far as the story is concerned. But there's a part of me that believes that a lot of it may be very organic, because there's a lot of sequences in the film where it's long takes. It will be like 3-4 minutes at a time, and there's no cuts. And I feel like there's something about that conversation that felt very organic to me, that felt rather improvised, that seemed very real within the context of the scene. So a part of me wonders that how much of that was in fact improvised on the spot. But regardless of that, if it was word for word or if it was actually improvised, it worked very effectively. But there's no doubt in my mind that there's got to be a lot of that in this movie, because the way that the film is moving from one beat to the next worked very effectively here. But I will also get into that as well too, because I actually did have a problem with that, which I'll be getting into with my negatives. But the other thing I also want to point out too with the overall story as far as the scripts are concerned is that there's something about this film when it comes to the dialogue that I thought seemed very, what's the best way I could describe it? I really did appreciate, I meant to say, the rawness of these conversations that you're hearing with these characters. That there's something about the way that these people the characters are talking, I meant to say, that just seems very, very, very real. And I can't help but wonder that how much of it is all improvised. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but you understand where I'm coming from with that there. But again, I think the way that the script was handled here worked very effectively, in my opinion. The relationship that you have between Angus and Angie, the two main characters in this film, it's going to be kind of weird for me to say this here, but I actually love the way that the story was handled in this film. But for the reasons that it's handled in a way that it's not formulaic. When you watch romantic movies, or especially when you're following a love story, I should say, in a romantic film, action film, romantic comedy, whatever the case may be, there's always a pretty formulaic process on how that's handled. I have nothing against it because there's a lot of great films out there that have all these familiar beats that we've seen before in romantic movies and in romantic relationships in films that I love. But this, on the other hand, is not that type of movie. It's the furthest from that. You definitely do feel the connection that these two characters have with one another. You can clearly see that they very much are in love with one another, but it's just not told them, and to say, in that formulaic way that we're accustomed to with a lot of mainstream movies and many other TV shows as well too that have the similar beats that we've seen before. This is the furthest from that. So I know that there may be some people who will probably watch this film who are accustomed to that and would prefer that, may not say click with that. I'm not saying that you would not be invested with the story. It's just that the way it's presented, the way it's handled here, it's just not going to be done in the traditional format that we've all seen before for those who prefer it that way. But for some reason, I love that about the story, that the way that it was handled, it seems so organic, so real, that to me, that's what real life looks like. And that's the one thing about this movie that I really, really did appreciate, that it's just, this is a very raw looking film, and it all seems very spontaneous. Obviously, it's a very structured film to a degree, but it seems very spontaneous, on the spot, and very in the moment. And that's how I felt about the relationship between between Angie and Angus. Something about their journey, for me personally, worked very effectively. And the great thing about it too is that even though the majority of the film is spent with Angus, you do get moments with the character of Angie, his girlfriend, where you get to see her perspective and you hear her thoughts, and you're wondering, and she's concerned for Angus along the way too, and it starts to yearn for him and question him and things of that nature. And when you're in those moments with the two characters, you can see that she's very much in love with him, but it's just asking questions to understand him a little bit better. And there's a lot of back and forth. But again, that to me seems like what real life would look like. And the movie doesn't do it in a very traditional cinematic format that we've all seen before, which is what I love about their story. There's really a whole lot about the film that I really did enjoy, but I'm going to close out with my positive with this. The city of Berlin, because the film takes place in Berlin, Germany, is like its own character in this film. I really did appreciate the fact that there is a part of Berlin, Germany that I'm not aware of here that we got to see in this movie. Now, I've never been to Berlin, Germany, but I've seen a lot of movies where a lot of the buildings and locations that I've seen in films I recognize. This is actually, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the very first film where I got to see a side of Berlin, Germany that I was not aware of at all. For example, the queer community out there, I didn't even know it was a large community out in Berlin. And it's known for being very open to people's sexualities and people being themselves and being comfortable with who they are and allowing them to just be free and just being themselves in that community. And that was something I was not aware of at all that I got to see in this movie that really did open up my eyes about of communities that exist out there, especially there in Berlin. Now, I will also point out too that even though the film does a good job in capturing a side of Berlin that I am not familiar with here, the one thing that I really did appreciate is keeping the honesty of the underground community that also exists out there, as far as like the rave scenes are concerned, and it just in the club scenes, if you will, in those underground community, that I thought was beautiful, and how it looked and how it made you feel like you were in that environment. And that's something that I have to say, I've said it before and I'll say it again, that really kept me invested with the story. So as you can tell right now, there's a lot that I really did appreciate about this movie that I really, really did enjoy. But that's going to be the end of my positives. So now let's get into my negatives. So for my first negative, it's going to be a weird one, because I complimented before on how Samuel did a really good job in directing this movie, keeping it a very raw or very organic, like you're really in the moment. It had this, like you're really in the trenches with the character. Like I love that aspect of his directing when it came to the movie. But I'm not gonna lie, that there were parts of the film that I felt like that was a little too much for me. Again, this is one of the reasons why I knew right away that even though I appreciated that approach with the directing, and I really did appreciate it, I actually liked it a lot, there were parts of me that I thought like, oh man, this is kind of too much here for me. And I remember thinking the first time I saw the film, when that thought crossed my mind, I was like, I know for a fact this is not going to be for everybody. I just know it right away. This is not going to be a film that is going to appeal to the mass audience. And not every film is meant to be that way, but I just knew right away that that was going to be the case here. So when I saw the movie for the first time, there were times where I just remember thinking like I would have approached, maybe I would have liked to seen the camera position differently to be able to allow the scene continue playing itself out without having to choose in this weird odd angle. But then as I saw it again the second and third time around, I started to have a different opinion on that, where I actually thought it worked a little bit more effectively than I thought it did the first time around. But I still kind of had that sentiment towards my opinion on that, on the certain scenes, the way that they were handled here, when as far as the camera positioning and things of that nature. So that did happen a lot for me in the movie. But again, as I watched the film the second, third time around, it didn't bother me as much, but there were moments where it did. Now, there's actually a few other negatives that I did want to get into, but I decided not to because of just the fact that it's in the spoiler territory here. But I will close out with my negatives on this. I felt like the film was too short. Now, I do want to give credit, though. The film does a good job in providing you enough for you to be able to tag along with this character's story. The biggest problem that I have with the film is that when there are moments where you get to see the characters that are conversing, like Angus and his girlfriend Angie. There's a beautiful scene where they're just going back and forth when she discovers Angus in her dress actually. And that scene goes on for minutes. Like I can't remember exactly how long, maybe 4, 5, 6 minutes, something like that. And it's just, you just see it how it all unfolds right in front of you. And I love that. But then when that happens, the next thing happens and it's just boom, boom, boom. And you don't really necessarily get a fleshed out story. A lot of times it's kind of just more filler scenes that I thought that worked well, but I felt like it could have probably been used elsewhere to flesh out certain character beats that you see in the movie that were introduced with certain characters that we've spent some time on and then were never revisited again. And I understand that they just serve the purpose for that particular moment in the film, but something about some of those events that occur when it comes to the character interactions that I thought could have been revisited or expanded a little bit further were just cut off too short, and then we move on to these other scenes that more or less kind of work like filler scenes. So if I remember correctly, I may have said earlier that I really, really liked this movie. I didn't love it. That was the reason why, because there's so much good material that was presented in this movie. Not enough time was spent on it to really expand on certain story beats, certain character beats, and so on. And I think that was one of the biggest flaws of this movie. But I still think it's a good film. So that will be the end of my negatives. So now let's get into my rating. So as I've already mentioned earlier, I really did enjoy this movie. I didn't love the film, but I really liked it a lot. Primarily because of the fact that the movie is way too short. There's a lot of great story with this movie that you just didn't have a lot of time to spend with the characters to really expand on the stories that I thought was so effective in this movie that I just wanted more time. This is one of those stories where I really believe the more time you have, the better the story will sink in more and more. And as much as I really did enjoy the film, that was really the biggest sticking point for this movie for me, where I just would have liked to spend more time, because I thought the way that Samuel had directed the movie and the way the film was acted, the way the film was directed, did work very well for the most part for me personally. But the real big issue that I said before is just that it's way too short. This is a story that needs to be told. We need to see stories like this more so we can get a real understanding of what a person goes through when it comes to understanding their sexuality and wanting to open up and be themselves and just find out who they are as a person, and at the same time being able to express that without being looked down on and learning to overcome these emotional hurdles that they've been going throughout their lives, and being able to develop the strength and confidence to be able to do that and not be afraid to do that along the way. So I know I kind of went off on a tangent with that, but this story needs to be heard and seen, and I think that this movie does that very, very well. We just needed more time, and that is it. But I still enjoy the film, as I already mentioned before, so for me, I will give this movie a raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. If you have seen the movie, let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and also make sure you share and like the videos and hit the notification bell while you're down there. And follow us on our social media accounts on Instagram and Facebook, New Release Wednesdays, and on Twitter at the NRW. Follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram, Rob_Medina0585, on Twitter, RobMedina0585, and on Facebook, simply just Rob Medina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and I have social media for the show as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob Medina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And I want to thank you all very much for checking out this review. Hope you guys did enjoy it, and until next time, stay safe out there, and cheers.